So, long-time viewers of the channel may remember a person called Scott. He's a mate of mine who also plays Airsoft, and I fixed a couple of his guns over the course of the channel's life. But he came up to me and said, I've broken another one and I'd like you to work on it, but don't worry, it's going to be a nice unique gun for your channel. And well, this is what he gave me. Unique. Now, to be fair to Scott, this is technically a new gun to the channel because I have worked on G&G L85s, both mine and Alice's AFE, but both of those are the pre-ETU version, whereas the one I have here on the table now is a newer ETU version which he bought last year around this time, but hasn't had all that much time to play with because of, well, COVID. So I thought we'd crack this open and have a look at the internals, because I've not had a look at the new ETU system, and I thought we could compare it to my version to see what changes G&G have made. So without further ado, let's grab mine down. Now basically this is set up slightly out of stock configuration. This is the Afghan spec, but the internals are near enough stock, bar the MOSFET and I think the new motor, so we can at least compare all the other parts. I'm not liking how bare that wall is. Let's just fix that. That'll do. Right, now before we dive on into the internals, I'd just like to whore out the channel quickly and just say, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing or dropping a comment and a like down below. It really helps out with the algorithms on YouTube and getting this channel up and the views. That's enough of that. Let's crack on with the teardown. Right, so I've just jumped the whole teardown process because it's fairly straightforward and they're both exactly the same. And I thought I would make this video nice and short and snappy. Here I have all the parts, other than the upper receivers and barrel assemblies. Those are pretty much, as I'd expect, identical. With the exception of, for some reason, mine, and I believe mine is the only one I've seen from G&G that has come like this, has a metal hop chamber and like coated brass barrel, as opposed to a plastic hop chamber and a brass barrel. Here is mine. Note the cast metal hop chamber and shiny barrel that is not magnetic. And here is Scott's. Note the plastic chamber and the very brass barrel. But anyway, let's look at the Team H's, or as the Americans would call them, the lower receivers. This is my one here. Now it looks slightly more glossy, it's obviously more beat up, it is 6 years old now. But the only thing I've noticed that is really different about them is the trigger pull on mine, other than my 3D printed adapter. Let's take it off so you don't feel it. The trigger pull on mine is a lot stiffer than on Scott's. That is very light, as opposed to mine, which is nice and stiff. Yeah, that's a bit weird. I don't know why they changed it, but maybe people said the trigger pull was too heavy. Now I feel like this is far too light. Now let me just quickly run through the mods I've done. Mine has got a gate MER 3.2 rigged up to it instead of the original funky active braking, but it wasn't active, passive braking system installed in it. So originally you'd had a trigger wire come in, so you have your positive come into the switch, come out of the switch, go to the motor, but then the negative would return to another part of the switch and then out to the negative of the battery. And the idea was that when the trigger contacts were broken, the carriage would slide back and make a circuit from the connecting point and trigger switch through the motor, which slowed it down quicker. This was all designed to effectively pre-cock the gun, which is why the blowback mech on this behaves slightly different to how you'd expect. So it comes back, and then as it gets to a certain point, it goes up a ramp, which pulls the kind of blowback finger up and above the piston, so the blowback goes forwards while the piston is still sitting at the back, which in my mind makes the blowback of the L85 the most realistic, because effectively with the pre-cocking as they designed it, The piston would be held all the way at the rear with the bolt at the front. You'd fire your shot, so your piston would go forwards, BB would leave the barrel, and then it would cycle for the next shot. So the shot happens and then the bolt cycles. And by the end of the shot, the piston will be at the back and the bolt will have gone back, gone over the break point and slid back forwards. So you get shot fired, then mock recoil or mock blowback. But a lot of people found that jammed up the gun on semi, and so deleted that feature. As have I. I've done it with the gate MOSFET board. Admittedly, if I put a pre-cocking MOSFET in, I could set it up to do that and it to cycle properly. However, G&G's solution to this has been to put in a proper ETU. So there is a 2-switch ETU, I believe. 3-switch ETU, counting the selector. So you have trigger switch, which is there. You then have your cycle detection switch, which is there. And then you have your selector switch, which is there. Which by all accounts fixes the problem, and they do cycle flawlessly. Although these MOSFETs or these ETU boards have been known to not be the most reliable. However, fear not, there is a replacement, and you can just go buy the Perrin ETU++ and replace this board with the Perrin board, and then you're pretty much good to go. I know a couple of people have done that and said they've had absolutely no problems, really like it, and I've recommended to Scott that if he ever has any issues with this, just don't worry about it, get rid of it, put the ETU, Perrin ETU in. Anyway, that was a bit of a sidetrack. The other things that I've done to this that make it not stock, obviously the motor's been replaced, it's been used hard and with active braking for 6 years, so I've burnt through I think 2 other motors. I also basically exclusively use this in semi. So I'm now on to a ZCI 22 TPA high torque, which by all accounts works really, really well and I like it. I've also replaced my nozzle because young stupid me broke the old one while doing tech work. So I replaced that, and I replaced the bushings with bearings because I wanted to try bearings and see if they made any difference. Long story short, they didn't. So now that we know that, let's have a look and see what other changes G&G have done. And to be honest, the only one I can see is the motor. They've put in the iFrick 25k motor. At the time, that just had the that just had the G&G high torque motor in it. I think it was a slightly higher quality than the stuff you tend to find in Raiders, but don't think it was a Neo. I think it was akin to something like the Classic Army high torque, which is definitely not a Neo. It is just iron core, but it performed well. However, Neos are better. So let's dive on in a bit further and get a better look at this ETU board. Right, so we've now got the gearboxes stripped down to their bare necessities, really. And what I was thinking was that they were probably going to reuse the gearbox casings and just change the bits they put on the outside of them. But alas no, the gearboxes are different. Weirdly though, they've maintained some of the support for the ease springs lever, but not all of it. So they've got that hole there, which is that hole there. But then they've changed the placement of the holes up here. As you can see, the holes come down to fit the ETU. And then they've added other bits and pieces. Basically, everything up until this point, from the back of the gearbox coming forwards, is the same. And I'm pretty sure it's the same on the other side. Yep, near identical up until there, with just this section being changed, which is really annoying. I mean, I understand why. It means they've designed it for the ETU with some leftover features, but they didn't need to. They didn't really need to change it. They could have probably made something work in this space, but alas no. And as I was alluding to, the bits that bolt on the outside all are slightly different. So I'll bring them in. This part here has been replaced with this plastic bit. This is part of the selector. So this is what would allow you to do full auto. This is obviously the plastic part which gets knocked and acts upon that switch there. This is our trigger switch. Very simple. Just one push. This is our old trigger carriage, which is obviously a carriage that can be lifted up and broken out of the way, like your standard V2, V3 design. Now this is as far as I was going to go, however Scott's gearbox is now locked up, which makes me think that there is some crud in it, which means I need to open it up all the way to clean it out. Wow, that is a lot of gunk in there. I'm also noticing a distinct lack of shims on some of these, but hey ho, if that's how G&G want it to run, that's how G&G want it to run. That's a very standard looking anti-reversal latch, as opposed to the funky old one. They are pretty decent gears from G&G, nothing wrong with these. They look decent, although that is a crap ton of gunk and grease. You know what, Scott, my friend, you're going to get a nice clean gearbox back with less grease in it than this. Okay, so that's what the new gearbox looks like on the inside. What does the old gearbox look like? Noting that I've obviously shimmed this because it's mine and I've had it for all of the years that have ever existed. Actually, it's surprisingly similar. I think I put the sector delay chip on. I was having feeding issues, and it turned out it was because I misplaced my tappet place spring and put the wrong spring in it. Other than that, yeah. So this is looking shockingly familiar, except for my awesome anti-reversal latch jobby here. So there you have it. They're similar, but not identical, unfortunately. Not similar enough to be able to take the new ETU trigger switches and put them in the old gearbox, which is a shame. However, that doesn't mean there isn't a way that it can probably be rigged up so that you can have some kind of ETU system in the old style gearbox, but using the G&G version it is not the way, unfortunately. Right, so there's the gear trains covered and the motors. So let's put this all back together and then we'll take a look at the compression side of things, although I have a feeling this is going to be identical because G&G has pretty much nailed this now. I will see you in about 10 minutes, but you will see me in 3, 2, 1. Right, so we got the two upper parts of the gearbox here, so let's take them apart and see how the internals compare. There we have it, the two compression parts of the gearbox torn down. And as I thought, pretty much every part of it is identical. Note that I have an aftermarket spring and I had to replace my piston head last year after my original one cracked. But other than that, this is very similar to this, with one exception, and that is the spring guides. So my one is kind of a plastic single piece here, slightly different design on top. It feels plasticky but also feels quite solid, so I wonder if it's plastic over metal. This one, however, has a full 3-piece metal bearing on the back, which is nice to see, and will help with the longevity of the parts. Obviously still it's a linear spring, much prefer my non-linears, but hey, there's no big difference there. And again, you can see the difference in the colour of the two gearboxes, but whether or not this is kind of oxidized over time or if it's just a slightly different mix in their casting. One thing to note though, stock, the compression is actually surprisingly good on these cylinder heads. They're only single O-rings and they are plastic, but they're not too bad. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can get any aftermarkets because these are their own custom design. Whether or not they are M14 compatible, maybe. I don't think so though. But you can get a good air seal on them nonetheless. The only part that can let the air seal down is the nozzle. It's not an O-ring nozzle, but they are M4 style nozzles. So get an M4 nozzle and put it on there and happy days. See example here. Well, I think that about covers the internal differences between the new ETU version of the L85 and the Gen 2 version of the L85, which is this one. The Gen 1 was very similar to the Gen 2, with the difference being it was a full 19-tooth piston on it. Well, it kind of makes sense because you can have an SR25 length cylinder in it, and you've got massively long barrels. It always struck me as weird. G&G used an SR25 length cylinder, which is great for long barrels, but then they didn't make an LSW. If they made an LSW, it would rock as a marksman's rifle because you could have a big cylinder volume, a full length barrel, and you could push heavy weights through it. But alas no, the longest they do is the IW, individual weapon. So that's pretty much that. I'm going to fix that piston, put this all back together, and I will join you in a moment for the conclusion. And here they are, reassembled and looking absolutely fine. One Afghan spec and one basically cadet GP rifle, although many will just go, oh, it's a jungle version, although jungle now has DD rail on it. So there we go, that was a bit of a deep dive into the differences between the old school Gen 2 G&G L85 and the ETU version. Unfortunately, you can't just take an ETU and drop it into the old gearbox. They've managed to tweak it just enough you can't do that. But if you can track down an ETU gearbox, it should drop happily into the old school body. Or even if you can just get the lower half, you can take your old upper compression parts, put them on the lower half ETU gearbox and drop it straight in and get cracking. But that being said, the old one still works absolutely fine if you just get rid of the active brake circuit and put in a MOSFET. And mine's still trucking 6 years later and after quite substantial use. So I know this has been a bit of a niche one for the L85 lovers out there, and I guess even more niche the G&G L85 lovers out there, but I hope you found it entertaining, and I hope those of you who actually have these found it mildly interesting. Stay tuned, there is more videos coming, and hopefully they won't take the month or 2 months that some of my videos have been taking recently. I'm thinking 2 weeks now. Hopefully, no promises. So, until then, see you all soon, stay safe, and goodbye for now.